everyone, and welcome to The Brake Run. My name is Greg.
My name's Kevin.
And I'm Frank. And today we're going to be having a discussion on what counts as a new coaster credit and what doesn't count as a coaster credit.
So it's often a hot topic in the industry among coaster enthusiasts and people that love to ride lots of different roller coasters.
Like
as what counts as a roller coaster?
Yep.
So there's like the age-old conversation about like, okay, well, a roller coaster is something that is gravity powered, but it's on a track. So like a log flume doesn't count, but a kiddie coaster at a carnival counts.
Yep.
So this is often hotly debated, and it's something that a lot of coaster enthusiasts have very important and very strong opinions on. So I figured in this video, we should talk about what counts as a roller coaster and what doesn't count as a roller coaster from our opinion.
So first I want to ask, we're going to go on like what isn't a coaster before we kind of break it down into further ones. So first, something like a kiddie coaster. Yeah, that is a coaster. It is gravity powered. Obviously, something like all these back here are roller coasters. A train, it's not a roller coaster. But what about like a Larson Loop, which is like a typical Ring of Fire at like a carnival that Six Flags and a lot of them, because when they were marketing these brand new rides at their parks, they considered them roller coasters. But however, most people in the coaster community did not think they were roller coasters. What do you guys think?
They're definitely not a roller coaster, and don't let anybody tell you that they are. Again, that's my personal opinion, and some people might disagree, but there is nothing that screams roller coaster about this. When I look at this, I see a flat ride, a ride that doesn't really have any kind of roller coaster aspect to it. So I know that's not a great description, but
it's just flat out, it's not a roller coaster.
Yeah, no, for sure. It reminds me of the Ferris wheels that you can rock the car with, you know? You're not going to consider that a roller coaster, even though you're getting kind of the same. You're going in a circle, and you got that kind of enclosed feature to it.
And throwing up.
Yeah, and throwing up. But, so, there's no way it's a roller coaster.
Yep.
So now let's also consider a roller coaster like Gemini at Cedar Point, where there's two separate tracks, or like at Disneyland, the Matterhorn bobsled, which has two separate tracks. Is that, if you ride both sides, is that two coaster credits?
What do you think, Greg?
I would say yes, because there's a different element to each one. There's it could be the same like design of the track, but like it's still different. When Universal had Dueling Dragons,
exactly,
you know, you're gonna count each one as a credit. You're not gonna be like, oh yeah, I rode Dueling Dragons and this one credit. Like, no, you rode both sides.
As long as you ride both sides.
Yeah, you gotta ride both sides. Yeah.
But what about, Greg, if Dueling Dragons was exactly the same, both sides were exactly the same, would you count both of them as a new credit?
Then you're getting, I don't know, it's kind of, I would still say yes, just on the aspect that it can look the exact, or like not look the same, it could be the exact same ride, you're doing the same loop, the same drop here, the same turn here, the same, everything same intensity, same speed, but it's still themed differently. Like it's still a different types of dragons. So you got it was like a fireball or whatever it was, and then the other side, and you get a different feeling and sensation from riding each one, even though they're the same ride. That personally I would count as two credits.
So my mindset is, if it's a different piece of steel or wood entirely, it's a new credit.
Okay.
It's kind of the same thing as, like, take for example the Vekoma Boomerang. You see that ride everywhere. It's the same ride whether you ride it in Hershey Park, whether you ride it in Six Flags St. Louis, or
Same
Wild
ride.
Adventures.
Yep.
It's the same ride.
Yep.
I still count all of them as different credits because they are different physical pieces of steel, even if they were right next to each other.
Yep, because it doesn't matter, because even though it's the same layout, great. Same thing with the Wild Mouse. They're same. A lot of them are the same clones, all different parks. As long as you ride them, it might be the same layout, but it's still a brand new credit. But now, Kevin, let's say you rode a ride at one park and it was transferred to another park. So, for example, you had Chang back in the day. It was at Six Flags, Kentucky Kingdom, got transported, the same exact ride, they didn't touch the layout, just got picked up, dropped in Six Flags, and repainted at Six Flags Great Adventure. Is that a new coaster credit if you rode it at Kentucky Kingdom?
My thought is no. Again, going back to that same piece of steel, if I've been on it at Kentucky Kingdom, it doesn't count at Great Adventure. It's the same thing as if I ride a roller coaster at IAAPA, and it gets bought by a park, and I ride that roller coaster at the park, doesn't count.
Yep. Same thing with like a traveling fair or carnival. Let's say they have a kiddie coaster and then it comes back in town each year and you ride the same coaster each year. You're not going to get 50 coaster credits from riding it every year. It's still the same coaster credit because it's the same actual track.
What do you think?
I definitely agree with that as well. Like, you can paint it, you can do whatever you want to it, but it's at the end of the day, it didn't change. It's the same. It's the same. You just picked up and moved it.
Yep. So now let's talk about like a typical RMC conversion. So you had Gwazi to Iron Gwazi. They grow on the same page, but that is a brand new coaster credit because it's totally a brand new ride. So it's totally different layout. It's basically a wood coaster to steel coaster. But now let's say you have a typical wood coaster like Ghost Rider at Knott's Berry Farm, and they just retracked it. They didn't really change the layout. They got new trains, but the layout was the same. They just added new wood. Is that a new coaster credit?
Absolutely. And the reason why I say that, and again, this is my mindset, wooden roller coasters need maintenance every year. And they need to be retracked in certain areas of the ride every year.
Yep.
But oftentimes, it's at most 25% of the ride that's going to be retracked every year in a downtime. If a ride experiences a downtime and receives over 50% retracking, in my eyes, that is going to be a new credit.
Okay. Greg, what do you think?
I would have to agree with Kevin that it would count as a new credit. I can see where people might get a little like, but it's still the same ride.
Yeah.
It goes back to that, it just kind of didn't, even though it didn't move, it basically the same mindset they might have there. Personally, I would say that if again is over 50% of the retrack, you're going to get a new experience from that ride, and it's going to be different than what it was before, and that is how I would estimate if it's a new coaster credit or not.
So I just want to clarify, before this video is filming, we were talking about this, and somebody brought up the great point of the Coney Island Cyclone got retracked over the course of years, and yes, almost 100% of the ride got retracked over the course of 3 or 4 years, but it didn't all happen at once.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I would not consider that a new credit, because if you refer back to what I just said, it has to be the same downtime over 50%. So if you're going to do 25% of the ride over 4 years, that doesn't count.
So back to Ghost Rider, I see where you guys are coming from, and I also see where people say it's not a new coaster credit. I'm somewhere in the middle where I really can't make up my mind, because I'm just so in the middle where I could totally understand it being a new credit, but at the same time, it not being a new credit. Just because wood coasters, again, always have that refurb. Just because they added a little bit more refurb than what they usually do doesn't make it a new coaster.
Yeah,
it's really hard.
It's interesting too that we use Ghost Rider as example, because there's an added layer of that we didn't even think about. Was not only did it get fully retracked, it got new trains as well. And the new trains, they went from the older boxier style PTC trains to the newer, more smooth Millennium Flyer trains. You're still sitting down, but is the combination of that retrack plus the new trains, is that enough to sway you?
I don't know. But I want to branch off on more wood coaster controversy. Now let's talk about Hades 360. So Hades was a wood coaster by Gravity Group, but then back in 2012, they took out a small section of the ride and added a corkscrew. Is that a new coaster credit because they added a new element to the ride?
I would say so, yes, because you're taking what the old ride was and you're physically changing what you are experiencing now. There's a whole different element added into there. So you're going to get a different ride experience, and why would that not count as a new coaster?
But you're talking about ride experience. So if I put VR goggles on, that's going to change the ride experience. Is that a new coaster credit?
I think it's different, because what you had talked about with Hades 360, again, another ride that got new trains. It's just funny that we keep bringing it up. But with Hades 360, there was an actual hardware change to the track and the trains of the attraction.
So now, Kevin, you mentioned changing the hardware on a ride. Let's talk about Incredible Hulk, which, before we even dive into that rabbit hole of is it a new coaster credit with the refurb, well, let's say they didn't do the refurb and they changed the hardware from a tire launch system to a magnet launch system. Is that a new coaster credit? Because you just said if you change the hardware, it's a new coaster credit.
What do you think, Greg?
I think I would be more in the middle here. I could see where people would say yes, because you are changing that hardware aspect of it, but then you also are going to have the people like, oh, no, not at all, because it's still the same ride.
Yeah.
Like, the track didn't change, nothing like that changed. So I could see where it would be, I'd kind of be on where you were with the one before, just in the middle, like, kind of torn. I don't know if I could count it.
See, if they just change the launch system, it is not a new coaster credit.
I think this is a unique one, because when you have a tire-driven launch going from a magnetic launch, you would have to think about, does the actual launch experience and the acceleration times, do they change, right? And if I am getting a faster acceleration out of it or a slower acceleration out of it that's dramatically different, hell yeah, I'm going to count it as a new credit. But if it's the same acceleration, it's the same feeling that you experience, I probably wouldn't count it. So that's kind of where my opinion is.
Okay, so now again, diving even further into Hulk. Obviously, back in 2018, basically they scrapped the whole ride except for just a little section of it, and they kept the supports up, but they got brand new trains and they basically manufactured new track for the coaster. New coaster credit, yes or no?
100%. I don't see any reason as to why it's not. You redid the entire track except for the tiny little portion. It's over 50%. Like Kevin had stated earlier, that I'm on the same wavelength that, you know, you overdo over 50% in one downtime, that it's a new ride. It's a new coaster credit.
Okay.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree too. The Incredible Hulk is a new coaster because they basically got rid of the ride. Like, the ride was done and they rebuilt it. So as we kind of said with the Boomerang, if they build another Boomerang, which is another track, but it's in a different spot, it's a new coaster credit. It's kind of the same thing, but it just happens to be at the same exact spot.
Yeah.
They got rid of basically the whole ride, and they rebuilt it with brand new steel. So it's definitely a new coaster credit.
Yeah. So now I want to talk about, let's say with Hulk, just using that as an example, they kept the track the same. Hulk has over-the-shoulder restraints. Hulk switches to lap bars only on a new train.
So almost kind of like when they took at Cedar Point Mantis and made it Rougarou. So they took a stand-up train and made it to a sit-down floorless train.
Yeah.
Is that a new coaster credit?
I would say yes. Coming from my experience, I would say you are changing how you experience that ride. It's kind of like a retracking. They put the same coaster on Hulk. They just redid the steel, right? It's essentially the same ride on that aspect. So I would say that, you know, if they change the restraints from over the shoulder to
lap bar,
that you're going to get a different, not only feeling when you ride that ride, but different experiences of airtime and things like that than you would have got with the restraints. That I think it would count as a new code.
You know, I think it's also worth mentioning, when you get different trains, that could also affect who is eligible to ride. It could affect the height requirement. It could affect
body dimensions,
the body dimension requirements, right? And if a ride changes and there's no changes in my body, but now I'm not eligible to ride the ride because of that change, of course it's going to be a new credit.
Interesting. See, I do not think that's a new coaster credit. If you just got new trains but you didn't change the actual ride, I don't. If I ride a coaster like this or like this, it's not a new coaster credit for me.
Yeah.
It's like almost like if I ride a coaster with a little more room for more airtime, it's not a new coaster credit. So for me, just changing a train is not a new coaster credit. Again, if they kind of what they did with Hulk, I would say it's a new coaster credit, but just adding a new train, that doesn't do it for me as a new coaster credit.
So kind of what got us talking about this is the recent news of Mystery Mine and Lightning Rod both receiving track updates in the off season this past year. Mystery Mine, let's talk about that first. They, in order to improve the rider experience for comfort, they removed a vertical drop and a very awkward half pipe turnaround, and instead changed it for a lateral turn and a less steep drop, and that's it. Completely different track segments, completely different track pieces. The old pieces of track are still standing. It's almost like a fake out now. So is that a new credit? Because you basically took out kind of the opposite of Hades 360. Hades 360 added an element. This took out an element.
Ooh, yeah. So for me, again, I would say it's not a new coaster credit. So you're only changing less than 5% of the ride is not a new coaster credit. Now, let's say that whole first half of the ride before you go back inside, let's say they scrapped all that and that's all brand new track, all brand new elements, maybe more inversions. I would say that counts as a coaster credit. Just because they add a different turn, that's not a new coaster credit.
And I think I would disagree with you on that aspect, that they did change the experience that you received in that just first little part. I understand the last part stayed the same, and it's not 50% like we had kind of established before, but the fact that they took out that element, that turn, even though it was the awkward half pipe turn and the steeper drop, and it kind of looks now,
downgraded it.
yeah, it kind of looks now like it's the beginning of a kiddie ride, like just whoop. All right, now let's go to the next part. So I feel like that would be. Yes, it's a new coaster credit. It made it, in my opinion, the coaster part worse. But I would say it's a new credit.
Okay. Now with Lightning Rod was an RMC wooden roller coaster. It had this. I mean, a lot of people even debated if this was a wooden roller coaster to begin with. Mm-hmm. It's a wooden roller coaster. Now RMC, it was right. So now RMC has taken, what was it, 57% of the ride and replaced it with steel track. So there's 50% of the ride is wooden track and 50% of the ride is steel track. Lightning Rod is in a league of its own now.
Yeah.
Is that a new credit?
And that's even harder because we haven't seen this before. At least with like some things, we've seen a few different like it's so hard because I think for this it's the first time it's ever been happened before. So it's not something that we've seen before that we can kind of have a precedent on. For me, it's too early for me to tell if it's a new coaster credit, but I would say it is now a steel coaster because again, they converted more than half the ride to steel. So I think now it's definitely a steel coaster, but I'm not sure if it's a new coaster credit. My gut is turning more towards no because I don't know. It's so hard.
And I know this might contradict a little bit what I said about Mystery Mine, but I'm actually going to say that yes, it's a new coaster. Going back to the first kind of precedent we set, it's over 50% of the track in one downtime because it's 57. So that is a new coaster. Plus, now everyone is pretty much going to be in agreement that it's steel, not wood, with that change. And so that's you're completely changing the style of the coaster.
Yep, I agree with you, Greg. And I got a couple other interesting ones that we could talk about.
Let's do it.
First one is, let's take a look at Racer at Kennywood. Racer at Kennywood is what's called a Mobius Loop roller coaster. Mm-hmm. So it's a racing roller coaster, and we've already established two roller coasters next to each other are two different credits.
Right.
What if you started on the left side, and by the end of the ride, you were on the right side? So
and you didn't ride the whole track.
And you did. So technically, you go through the entire ride and you end on the left side.
But there's a whole nother side to the other.
Yes. So think about two racing coasters, but they're connected. What do we think about that? Is that 1 credit, 2 credits, half credit?
0.5. It's uno. It is 1 credit. Just because it's all one continuous track. If it was 2 separate tracks, it would be 2 separate coasters. But if you ride just one side, is that still the coaster credit? Because you only get the road half the ride. I would say yes, just because it's basically the exact same ride. It's not like, again, a Dueling Dragons where you end it, you get off the ride, but then the other half is totally different. I consider even if you only rode one half of it, it's still a coaster. You still get it.
I agree with you that it definitely would only be one because it is one continuous track. It's not 2 separate tracks. I might be more in the middle on if you only do half of it as the full credit.
Yeah.
Because even though it's still the one track, I know it's the same. You still got that.
You never got the full.
You never got the full track of it. So it's like you say you got on a new tracked like Hulk, and then you got evac halfway through. Are you going to count the credit?
Yeah.
It's essentially the same thing because you didn't finish the other half.
Yeah.
So I personally wouldn't count the credit. I think you would need to do both sides of it, even though it is only one, to get the full credit.
So I've been on Racer at Kennywood. I'm a proud owner of that half credit, and I do not have the other half. And I kind of just by having this discussion, I think it's fair that I'm going to consider myself a halfer until I get the other. So I will, when you hear my coaster count, it will be whatever it is. Gosh, it's like 400 something, 0.5, right? So that's kind of where I live.
But according to a mathematical standpoint, you have to round up if you're
That's true.
Exactly.
That's true.
Exactly. So now another one I want to ask is the concept of a powered roller coaster. So this would be like a Dragon Wagon at a fair, or Canada's Wonderland has it. It's a Mack Rides powered coaster. There is a motor underneath the roller coaster, and there's electric signal in the track, and that's what powers the roller coaster to move through the layout. Are there elements where it's coasting? Yes, but is a majority of the ride experience powered by a motor? Yes. Is that a roller coaster?
Yes, I consider powered coasters a coaster because you are coasting, even though, maybe it's only for a little bit of the ride, yes, but it basically is a steel tubular track, just like what we have here, but it's just giving you power at some points to get you through the ride instead of a chain or a launch. It's almost kind of like having a consistent launch throughout the coaster, so I would consider it a coaster.
What do you think, Greg?
I think I would agree with you that it would be a coaster, just even though it may not be the what we're used to with all these coasters, as you can see here. It still is a coaster. You're still going on the track. You're still getting power, whether it's by gravity or whatever it is. You're still getting, even though it's from a motor, it's still a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Well, now what about this? You can make the case that a Larson loop powers itself
And it does
then
have
coasts.
Yeah, but is it on? Is it considered to be on track?
I mean, kinda, but I'm under the impression of.
But the
I
whole
think there's
track is moving with the Larson loop.
Exactly. So the Larson loop is part of an entire chassis that just moves around and around and around, and that could move without the roller coaster car.
So that was a great discussion. I think that a lot of us, on some things we agree on, some things we don't agree on, some things we're kind of in the middle on. So I think this was just great to get that discussion flowing, because again, there's going to be people online that totally agree with us and some that don't. And if you don't agree with us, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. I think it's great just to listen to what other people think and hear, so we can again change our minds of what we see, and just it's great to hear what other coaster enthusiasts think as well.
Yep. Yeah. And I think there's a great resource out there in the roller coaster database.
Yep.
And that when I'm ever hazy on something, I will try to follow. Does the roller coaster database count as a credit? But at the end of the day, this is a hobby, and this is something that you make of whatever you want it to be. So if you want to have 17 million credits for one ride, sure, by all means go for it. But this is just our opinions, like Frank said.
Yeah.
Well, that about wraps up today's video. Be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, subscribe to us on YouTube for more daily updates.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
And I want to clarify here, we were talking with our team of analysts before this video.
Who? Darth Vader and Kylo Ren?